It disappears and forces the entire room to adjust its rhythm, its energy, its very atmosphere. You're not here to be liked. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're not here simply to be chosen by those who never truly saw you in the first place. You're here to be sovereign fully, unapologetically sovereign. There is a kind of silence that isn't emptiness or absence, it's ownership. There is a kind of stillness that doesn't imply apathy or indifference. Instead, it means you've stopped handing out access like apologies, no longer feeling the need to justify your presence or soften your boundaries. You don't explain your standards anymore. You live them boldly. You no longer negotiate with your intuition. You trust it deeply and without hesitation. You no longer plead for decency or respect. You expect it quietly, with calm certainty. And when that decency doesn't come, you leave. Not with loud drama, not with fiery confrontations, but with something far more terrifying to those who counted on you, the sheer power of absence too. Those who relied on your predictability, your constant presence, your emotional labor. You leave a void, the gap where your care and effort used to be. The silence where your steady explanations once lived now feels like a sealed door, closed by clarity and finality. Let them talk. Let them call you cold. Let them say you've changed. Let them brand it ego. That is not your concern, because the truth is clear and undeniable. You were never truly seen for who you really were. You were only valued for how easy you were to use, how predictable you were, how soft and accommodating you seemed. But softness without protection is erosion. And you have been quietly eroding for years under the weight of others' expectations. Not anymore. You don't move to be followed anymore. You don't speak to be praised or applauded. You don't stay just to be remembered out of obligation. You move only when it's time. Speak only when it truly matters. You stay only where you are. Respected in silence, not begged for in chaos. And now, they remember you not because you begged, not because you screamed, but because you stopped answering. You stopped responding when your name became less a welcome and more a summons, a call to serve, rather than to connect. That is power, and power does not roar, vanishes, and it makes others feel the undeniable weight of your absence. So here, we are not in revenge, not in bitterness, but in clarity. Not seeking domination, but returning to definition and sovereignty. You are no longer the mirror reflecting others' needs. We're no longer the fixer, the one who smooths every rough edge. You are no longer the performer who endlessly acts to please. You are the one who watches the fire burn and chooses to walk away without getting scorched, without losing yourself in the flames. You are the unshakable line, the untouchable stillness, the final word never spoken but always felt. This is your declaration. Not with banners or loud proclamations, but with quiet, undeniable presence. And now, let the world adjust to your silence the same way it never adjusted to your truth. They can use you. This isn't always rooted in malice. Sometimes it's done unconsciously, instinctively. People often gravitate toward what they can control, Levin, if they name that control love. Once they've learned your rhythm, they test it, they stretch it. They vanish just long enough to be missed and reappear just in time to be forgiven. They push and pull until you're no longer sure if the tension is your intuition or your imagination. And the cruelest twist? You stay. You stay because you want it to be real. You stay because you were conditioned to believe that loyalty requires suffering, that enduring the worst will eventually lead to seeing the best. Here's what no one ever told you: the truth that's been missing all along. Clarity is not cruelty. Boundaries are not betrayal. And being unreadable, that's not coldness, that's protection. You've spent years, perhaps a lifetime, trying to be understood, trying to make yourself digestible, explainable, emotionally convenient. But now it's time to become unpredictable. Not out of vengeance, not to deceive, but to protect yourself. Because when no one can read you, they can't script you. When they can't script you, they can't bait you into stories you never wanted to be part of. They can't manipulate a game you never agreed to play. This is the hidden machinery behind your suffering, the invisible gears that kept grinding you down. You were trained to believe vulnerability is always connection, that openness guarantees care. The truth is, in the wrong hands, vulnerability becomes leverage. And now that you know what comes next, you unplug the machine. Stop giving your healing a live commentary. You stop offering people the user manual to your heart. You stop confusing exposure with closeness. You begin to move with deeper intent. You speak with deliberate restraint. You become unreadable not because you're hiding, but because you've finally stopped leaking power through the cracks they kept widening. Machiavelli didn't champion cruelty. He stood for presence, for control, for the power of mystery and strategic silence. Because real power doesn't shout, doesn't need to. True power is in being listened to, even when you say absolutely nothing. So let them guess. Let them wonder what happened. Let them say you've changed. Let them call you distant. They're not wrong, because now you're no longer a pattern. You're no longer a map they can trace with familiarity. You are a storm-shifting, silent, and sovereign. Let's start with a truth most people are too afraid to admit. You were trained to betray yourself. Not in one grand, obvious act, but in small, quiet ways, slowly, repeatedly, incrementally, until it no longer even looked like betrayal. It looked like love. It looked like loyalty. It looked like being the bigger person. But it wasn't. It was erosion. You apologized for simply having needs. You stayed silent just to keep the peace. You made yourself smaller so others could feel safe in their own chaos. And the world called it maturity, wisdom, patience. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Did it? You kept giving and losing. You kept loving and aching. You kept showing up over and over again, in love or again, in the very moments that should have made you visible in the world. It clapped loudly. It celebrated your endurance, praised you for being understanding, for staying even after the apology that never came, for being low maintenance, easy to love, endlessly resilient. But what the world was really saying in its applause was something much colder. Your pain is convenient. Your boundaries, negotiable. Your silence, useful. And while you wore the mask of strength, perfectly still on the outside, inside, you were folding in on yourself like paper under pressure. So maybe now, finally, it's time. Time to pull off the mask. Time to expose the quiet truths. Time to break down the 3 most destructive mistakes you've been making in the name of being good. Because as Machiavelli warned, it was never about cruelty. His true caution was against naivety. And the first mistake is just that. Mistaking niceness for strategy. You think if you're nice enough, soft enough, pleasant enough, you'll be safe. That if you're agreeable, calm, always smiling, others will meet you with care. But niceness without discernment isn't compassion. It's self-neglect. Because the truth is, they don't respect your soft tone. They respect your limits. No one respects what they can access. At will, you've been taught to be likable. But now, it's time to become unmanipulable. Let your presence be warm, yes. Let your kindness be felt, but your availability. That should be earned, not handed out like a business card to anyone who asks for your time. The second mistake is oversharing as a substitute for connection. You equate openness with intimacy. You believe that if you pour out your story, reveal your wounds, expose your thoughts fully, they'll understand, they'll protect, they'll stay. But oversharing too soon isn't trust. It's vulnerability, without discernment. And what happens when you give someone the full map of your inner world before they've earned the right to hold it with care? They memorize it. Not to walk beside you, but to navigate around you, to gain leverage. Machiavelli would have called this a fatal error. He who exposes his plans too early gives his enemies the knife to cut him down. So next time you feel that urge to explain yourself, to fill the silence with stories, don't. Let the silence speak for you. Let mystery protect you. Clarity doesn't always need words. The third mistake is the belief that endurance equals loyalty. You've been endlessly praised for how long you stay, how much you tolerate, how many second, third, and 10th chances you give. But staying where nothing changes isn't love itself erasure. You've convinced yourself that your pain proves your devotion. If you keep absorbing the disappointment, the hurt will eventually stop. But it doesn't. It only escalates. Why? Because people don't change when you endure them. They change when they're afraid of losing you. If your loyalty has no line, they'll never stop crossing it. Endurance without mutual respect isn't noble. Submission dressed as virtue. So you have to ask yourself, where did you learn this? Who taught you that being good meant being silent? That conflict equals betrayal? That saying no makes you unkind? That emotional starvation is just part of love? Who shaped you into someone who bleeds in silence and then claps for herself for not screaming? Doesn't matter who. Anymore? What matters is this. You are not required to continue the cycle. You are not here to be the strong one. Not if that strength is silently killing you from the inside out. Machiavelli once wrote, "Never do your enemy a small injury. If you strike, strike with finality." And in psychological terms, that means it's time to stop making your boundaries sound like gentle suggestions. Stop handing out forgiveness without change. Stop teaching people through your silence that hurting you comes with no cost, no shift, no consequence. Because here's what they're actually learning from your tolerance: that your pain isn't urgent, can bargain with, and worst of all, that your silence is agreement. So they push further. They test you, escalate, not always with malicious intent, but simply because you trained them to. You taught them that your discomfort is flexible. You normalized your own suffering so thoroughly, even you began to confuse it with strength. You wore survival like a badge of honor. You dressed self-betrayal in the language of emotional intelligence. But enough. It's time to stop mislabeling dysfunction as devotion, to stop shrinking in the name of so-called peace, to stop pretending that holding yourself together is the same as being whole. You've been performing stability while your identity withers beneath the surface, hoping no one sees the cracks. But here's a Machiavellian truth no one ever handed you. Power is never forgettable, but nice? Nice disappears the moment it becomes inconvenient. So what now? You become unforgettable. Not by shouting louder, not by demanding space, but by becoming less available, less predictable, less easy to touch without reckoning. This isn't cruelty, this is clarity. And clarity is where power begins. They told you to be a good person, to always be kind, to forgive, to extend the benefit of the doubt, and you did. You gave your all. You forgave what broke you. You softened your voice for people who raised theirs. You stayed long after the room went cold, hoping your goodness alone could reignite the fire. But here's what they didn't tell you. The world isn't ruled by the good. It's ruled by the aware. By those who don't wait to be invited into power, but who know how to recognize it, claim it, and hold it without needing to announce it. This is where Machiavelli enters not as a villain. The storm that no one wanted you to hear, he didn't write for dreamers. He wrote for those ready to wake up, for those tired of illusions, for those finally willing to see that the world isn't fair and that waiting for fairness is just another way of choosing powerlessness. You've heard his quote, "It is better to be feared than loved." If you cannot be both, and you were taught to recoil, to label it dangerous, manipulative, wrong. But you misunderstood him. He wasn't urging you to harm. He was urging you to matter. To develop a presence so unwavering, so unshakable, that people pause before crossing. You. Not because you threatened them, but because they've learned to respect the cost. Because in the end, people don't respond to how kind you are. They respond to how clear you are, to how unreadable you've become, to how much weight your silence suddenly carries. You thought that moral purity would shield you, but Machiavelli understood the truth. Appearances shape reality. Perception governs behavior. And truth, on its own, means nothing if no one looks long enough to find it. That's why people respect confidence over compassion. It's why they fear stillness more than kindness. Because stillness is unreadable, means untouchable. You see, when someone doesn't reveal everything, when their emotions don't spill out, it unsettles others. It challenges their assumptions. It forces them to confront uncertainty. Inzi understood this too. He once said, "You have your way. I have mine. And as for the right way, it does not exist." Why? Because he saw what most never dare to acknowledge. Morality isn't fixed. It's not etched in stone. It bends, flexes, and shifts in the presence of power. Question the frame of that morality. When you accept it as absolute, don't rise above it. You become a tool of it. The good man, he's not celebrated. He's not honored. He's expected, used, and then forgotten. And Carl Jung, he pushed that truth even deeper. He warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that's exactly what's been happening to you, isn't it? You've called it bad luck. You've called it misfortune. You've even called it fate. But underneath all that, it was something else. It was obedience. Quiet, conditioned, unconscious obedience. You surrendered without realizing it. You mistook predictability for integrity. You believed that being reliable made you noble. No one ever told you predictability, when unguarded, becomes a weapon. When people know exactly how you'll respond, they stop respecting your presence and start manipulating it. They don't push your limits because they're heartless. They push because you've trained them to, because your empathy became a buffer for their behavior, because your patience became a predictable script they could follow. And while you were busy explaining your truth with honesty and hope, they were quietly moving the goalposts. While you waited eager to be seen, they were rewriting the rules of engagement. All in silence. All behind the smile you trusted. But let's be clear, this isn't about becoming cold. It's not about becoming bitter. It's about becoming aware. Because Machiavelli's genius wasn't rooted in manipulation. It was in clarity. He saw human nature for what it was. When power enters the room, it changes everything. And most people, they don't do what's right. They do what they can get away with. So if someone got away with using you, it doesn't always mean they're cruel. Sometimes it just means you allowed the frame that made it possible. The frame where you over-explained. The frame where you overgave. The one where you carried the weight of the relationship while they held none. The frame where your suffering was invisible, your boundaries optional. And let's be honest with ourselves. No one voluntarily walks away from a system that benefits them. Not without resistance. Not without discomfort. Not without direct confrontation and unshakable clarity. You want peace? Then stop begging for it. Enforce it. Own your terms. Because a morality that costs you your sovereignty is not virtuous. A slow, quiet form of self-erasure. The person who walks through life without controlling the frame around them, they're not living there being written, edited, and rewritten by everyone else. This right here is your turning point. Not to harden, not to wound, but to finally see. To grow out of the illusion that being lovable is protection, because it's not. What truly protects you is being unreadable. What shields you is being felt even when you're silent. It's being a presence that shifts the room simply by standing in it. Without apology, without overdash explaining, because the new morality, it isn't about keeping everyone comfortable. It's about refusing to betray yourself just to be digestible. You weren't born to be managed. You were born to be unmovable. Transformation doesn't begin when you learn something new. It begins when you unlearn what was never true. That's where it starts, not with the new knowledge you gain, but with the falsehoods you finally let go of. For years, you've tried, haven't you? To become more lovable, more agreeable, more tolerable, more manageable. You folded yourself into smaller and smaller shapes, hoping to fit into a version of love that asked you to be less. You silenced your truth so others could digest you more easily. You softened your voice, smoothed your edges, avoided conflict, and smiled through confusion, hoping that one day finally they'd see your goodness and decide to stay. But here's the truth, and it's sharp. We're never capable of loving you whole. Only ever admired the version of you that didn't shake their comfort. The version that didn't speak too loudly, didn't want too deeply, didn't see too clearly. They never wanted your truth. They wanted your compliance. So what did you do? You buried the real you, the intense you, bold, passionate, vibrant. A version of you who spoke with conviction and walked into rooms with certainty. And you didn't bury that version to heal. You buried it to survive. You adapted not out of growth, but out of fear. But what if I told you something different? What if I told you that the very part of yourself you buried, the intense, fiery, unfiltered you, is actually your source of power? Not the kind of power that controls others, but the kind that liberates you from needing their permission to exist. That's the shift. That's the awakening. You stop asking, will they still love me if I say this? And start asking, will I still love myself if I stay silent? Because real power isn't about it's about clarity. And clarity, especially the kind that comes from self-knowledge, feels dangerous to the people who benefited from your confusion. They preferred the version of you who doubted herself, who said yes with guilt, whose kindness had no conditions even, when their love did. But now you've changed. You're no longer explaining every thought. You're no longer reshaping your truth into something they can swallow. You're no longer dimming your fire just to keep the peace. And oh, they feel it. They feel the shift in your silence. It's a stillness that can't be read. The sharpness of your presence. The weight of your boundaries. And they say you've changed when you have. Because you've stopped bleeding just to keep them warm. This isn't bitterness. Out. It's boundaries. No more late-night anxiety, overanalyzing every message. No more rewriting your words just to make others feel more comfortable. No more guilt when your no is what saves your peace. Machiavelli didn't preach destruction. He warned against being destroyed. And for too long, you've been complicit in a quiet, smiling form of self-destruction. But now you pause before you reply. You calculate before you commit. You observe before granting access, because your presence is no longer something handed. Out freely, your energy. It's no longer a donation to anyone who asks. Your silence is no longer a blank check for people to project onto. You owe no one your constant availability. You owe no comfort to those who devalue your depth. Most importantly, you no longer apologize for this transformation. You honor it. You protect it. Because this isn't arrogance, self-possession. This isn't emotional distance. It's selective access. And yes, it will feel strange at first. The silence, the space, the shedding of your old skin, the old roles, the old names people gave you. You may feel tempted to explain, to reassure, to clarify that you're still a good person, that you haven't changed too much. But don't, because goodness without boundaries is not love, self-abandonment, dressed up as virtue. It's self-abandonment, and you're done with that. You're done sacrificing your truth just to keep things quiet. You're done pretending you're fine just to avoid confrontation. That steals your peace. You're done shrinking yourself so others don't have to feel insecure in your presence. And you're absolutely done trying to prove your worth to people who are only ever trying to disarm you, to dim you down until you fit their comfort. You are not here to be easy. You are here to be true to your pace, even when it's slower than others expect, true to your intuition, especially when it contradicts popular logic. True to the version of you that doesn't bend under pressure, but sharpens like steel. Let them call it ego. Let them whisper that you've grown cold or distant. Let them say you've lost your warmth. Maybe you have, but only the warmth that came from setting yourself on fire just to keep others comfortable. And when you stop burning, something miraculous happens. You start seeing. You start building. You start choosing with clarity. You start becoming someone even you can finally trust, without second-guessing every step. And that right there, that's the shift no one can undo. It's not reversible. It's not temporary. It's permanent. But here's the truth. No one ever taught you. Not in school, not in church, not even in the dozens of self-help books that said just be yourself. Because this is the part they always skip. The part where clarity becomes action, where silence becomes a weapon, and where presence becomes power. You've done the inner work. You've let go of the old identity, the one who overshared to feel seen, overgave to feel valued, and overexplained just to be understood. It's time to move differently. Not louder, smarter. Let's start with one of Machiavelli's most sobering rules. The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. In other words, your circle reflects your strategy and your behavior. It sets the tone for every room you enter. So let's talk about behavior. Let's talk about how you move now. Because if you truly want to outsmart the world, you can't. Keep narrating your soul like an open book. Stop narrating your life. You don't owe anyone your roadmap. You don't have to explain every thought, every decision, every retreat. Each time you narrate your next step, you hand people the blueprint to anticipate, intercept, and dismantle it. So stop giving them the blueprint. Stop broadcasting your evolution. Move in silence. Let your distance speak volumes. Rate your absence. Echo louder than any explanation. Let your decisions arrive like lightning in scene until it strikes. Confusion is a form of control. Use misdirection instead of explanation. There's a unique kind of power in being misunderstood when you choose it. When they ask for clarity, give them stillness. When they demand reasons, offer silence. Let your unpredictability be the storm they can't prepare for. Because when they can't read you, they can't control you. And when they can't control you, you reclaim the tempo. Don't overpower, outpace. Let them chase shadows while you execute in stillness. Let them talk, guess, theorize while you make moves that don't need to be announced. Use absence as a message, because when you're always available, you become familiar. And familiarity, over time, dulls value. People don't treasure what they can touch on demand. They treasure what they might lose. So withdraw, not out of bitterness, not to punish, but out of strategy. Let your silence become a pattern breaker. Let it unsettle the room. Let it disrupt the comfort. Let it create a silence so sharp that others are forced to notice what they had long overlooked. When you vanish without warning, without explanation, they don't forget. They pause. They notice. They rethink. You don't just leave a gap. You leave an imprint. Your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. It interrupts their rhythm, the rhythm of control they thought would always work. And make no mistake, they will test you. Guilt trips, nostalgic callbacks, and well-practiced victimhood will surface. Why? Because they've grown accustomed to your compliance, to your explaining, your fixing, your softening. But this time, don't bite, don't explain, don't negotiate. Your silence with yesterday's justifications. Don't offer comfort for the void you left. Let the silence speak for itself. No. Your lack of reaction is the reaction. It's the shift. It's the disruption. When their old playbook no longer works, when the familiar strings they used to pull stop bringing results, something happens. They either evolve or they exit. And both are wins. So be deliberate with your presence. Don't show up where your value isn't honored. Don't speak to fill space. Don't give in hopes of being remembered. Let your absence build mystery. Let your presence command stillness. Let your silence declare, I do not chase, I do not beg. I do not repeat myself. And when you do walk into a room, let the temperature shift, not through arrogance, not through force, but through unapologetic precision, through grounded self-possession. That's not ego, that's alignment. It's control. And control doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It just is. This, right here, is how modern Machiavellian strategy works. It's not about manipulation. It's about positioning. It's emotional economics at its highest level. You're not striving to be understood anymore. You're curating the perception. You're not performing for approval. You're positioning with intention. You don't need to yell to be heard. Do you just become unreadable? And when you're unreadable, people are forced to guess. They project. They spin stories. They craft narratives to explain your stillness, only to realize none of them land. None of them touch you. That is control. And control, real control, is always quiet. If you've done this right, they'll say you've changed. They'll say you're colder now, harder to reach. And they'll be right, because you no longer hand out access, you grant it with purpose. You don't react to calculate. You don't prove, you observe. You are no longer trying to show your worth to people who never had the eyes to see it in the first place. You are no longer bleeding out for people who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. You are no longer trapped in the role they cast for you. Now, you're writing the frame quietly, deliberately, without asking for a single ounce of permission. Let them talk. Let them say you've changed, because you have, but not in the way they assume. You didn't become cold. You became calculated. You didn't grow distant. You became selective. You didn't grow harsh. You just became unavailable to chaos. This is what real power looks like. And no, it doesn't resemble what you were taught. It's not loud, it's not pushy, doesn't argue to be seen or demand to be validated. It simply stops explaining, stops proving, stops performing. The new you doesn't walk into rooms trying to fix the energy. You set the temperature just by walking in. You don't ask for space. Your presence takes it effortlessly, like a silent command. Because true power isn't measured by volume or noise, it's gravity. It's that magnetic pull that shifts the entire energy of the room without a single word. It's the quiet, unreadable stillness that makes others shift uneasily in their seats, reconsidering every word they thought they would say next at once. They knew exactly how to move you, how to push your buttons, what to say, when to show just enough tears, how to apologize just enough, and when to act broken so you would rush in and patch the pieces again. You were predictable, manageable, but now you've gone off script. You no longer react on cue. You don't flinch at their attempts to weaponize guilt. You don't rush in to rescue chaos as you once did. You've become the variable in their equation, the unpredictable factor they can no longer calculate or solve. And that's exactly what they call selfish. They label it ego, but it's not ego, it's memory. It's data compiled from hard-earned experience. It's the price you pay for wisdom. You're not punishing them, you're protecting yourself. Because here's what you finally understand. You don't owe love to those who exploit your softness. You don't owe kindness to those who offer it only when they need something from you. You don't owe your presence or your energy to people who show up empty-handed, expecting you to carry both their burdens and your own. You are no longer the strong one if strength means bleeding silently inside. You're no longer the nice one. If niceness means tolerating disrespect just to keep a facade, you are no longer the loyal one if loyalty means abandoning your own truth to stay trapped in their narrative. You have become the sovereign one. You come and go by choice, not obligation. You speak when it truly matters. It's not just to fill silence. You love fully but never blindly again. And here's the part that stings the most for them. You've stopped handing out explanations like candy. You've stopped performing transparency as a currency to buy approval. You've stopped shrinking yourself just so they can feel bigger. Now you move like fog, present yet untouchable, seen but never fully grasped. You are present but untouchable because you have learned what Machiavelli always knew deep down. The promises you made were a necessity of the past. The boundaries you break now are a necessity of the present. You are allowed to change, to outgrow the roles that once made you useful, to abandon patterns that once only made you survivable, even if they don't like it, even if they feel betrayed, even if they brand you the villain now, because deep down you know the truth. You were never truly loved for who you were. You were loved for how well you performed, how much you tolerated, how easily you bent to their will. But that version of you is gone. The script is ashes. The act is over, and what remains is presence. Sharp, quiet, uncompromising. You don't owe them softness. You owe yourself sovereignty. You don't need to be visible to be powerful. You don't need to be liked to be respected. You don't need to be available to be remembered, because the new face of power, it doesn't chase. It doesn't explain. It doesn't beg to be seen. It disappears and forces the entire room to adjust its rhythm, its energy, its very atmosphere. You're not here to be liked. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're not here simply to be chosen by those who never truly saw you in the first place. You're here to be sovereign fully, unapologetically sovereign. There is a kind of silence that isn't emptiness or absent sights ownership. There is a kind of stillness that doesn't imply apathy or indifference. Instead, it means you've stopped handing out access like apologies. There's no longer feeling the need to justify your presence or soften your boundaries. You don't explain your standards anymore. You live them boldly. You no longer negotiate with your intuition. You trust it deeply and without hesitation. You no longer plead for decency or respect. You expect it quietly, with calm certainty. And when that decency doesn't come, you leave. Not with loud drama, not with fiery confrontations, but with something far more terrifying to those who counted on you, the sheer power of absence too. Those who relied on your predictability, your constant presence, your emotional labor, you leave a void, the gap where your care and effort used to be. The silence where your steady explanations once lived now feels like a sealed door, closed by clarity and finality. Let them talk. Let them call you cold. Let them say you've changed. Let them brand it ego. But that is not your concern, because the truth is clear and undeniable. You were never truly seen for who you really were. You were only valued for how easy you were to use, how predictable you were, how soft and accommodating you seemed. But softness without protection is erosion, and you have been quietly eroding for years under the weight of others' expectations. Not anymore. You don't move to be followed anymore. You don't speak to be praised or applauded. You don't stay just to be remembered out of obligation. You move only when it's time. You speak only when it truly matters. You stay only where you are. Respected in silence, not begged for in chaos. And now, they remember you not because you begged, not because you screamed, but because you stopped answering. You stopped responding when your name became less a welcome and more a summons, a call to serve, rather than to connect. That is power. And power does not roar. It vanishes, and it makes others feel the undeniable weight of your absence. So here, we are not in revenge, not in bitterness, but in clarity. It's not seeking domination, but returning to definition and sovereignty. You are no longer the mirror reflecting others' needs. You are no longer the fixer, the one who smooths every rough edge. You are no longer the performer who endlessly acts to please. You are the one who watches the fire burn and chooses to walk away without getting scorched, without losing yourself in the flames. You are the unshakable line, the untouchable stillness. The final word never spoken but always felt. This is your declaration. It's not with banners or loud proclamations, but with quiet, undeniable presence. And now, let the world adjust to your silence, the same way it never adjusted to your truth.